Hello everyone, I'm here to tell you some scary stories, but in a way that helps you relax and fall asleep. If you enjoy these videos, don't forget to like and subscribe, it really helps a lot. Also, tell me in the comments where are you watching from and what time is it right now. Now take a deep breath, listen to the gentle sound of the rain, and let your mind drift into the dark, peaceful world of tonight's story. The quiet shift, the hospital, had a strange stillness that night. It wasn't unusual for late hours to be quiet, but this silence felt heavier, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. The fluorescent lights hummed softly, a sound most people never noticed until it became the only sound left. She had worked there long enough to know the rhythm of the place, when the floors creaked, when the air vents sighed, when the automatic doors on the first floor would sometimes open by themselves. She never paid those things much attention. Hospitals had their quirks, but that night, something in the air felt wrong, like a static charge that crawled across the skin. Her fiancé had come by around 9:30, bringing dinner like he always did when she volunteered for overtime. He had that easy, grounded way about him, the type of person who didn't scare easily, the kind who laughed at ghost stories and said he'd believe in spirits when one shook his hand. He might not have been laughing after that night. The office was tucked into the corner of the surgical wing, a small room lined with filing cabinets and 3 glowing monitors. 2 were mounted on the desk, one on a little shelf above, a view into the heart of the hospital. The right monitor showed the camera feeds, a wall of 26 boxes in grainy color. One of those cameras pointed down the long, sterile hallway of the OR, a straight shot ending at the red line painted on the tile, where the PACU door stood always open. The fiancé sat on a stool beside her, his attention caught by the flickering feeds. He wasn't supposed to be there, technically, but the supervisor trusted him. He was quiet, respectful, and knew not to touch anything. It was 22:47 when he saw it. On the right monitor, the feed from the PACU camera showed the overhead light turning on. Then off, then on again. He leaned closer. "Hey," he said softly, tapping the edge of the desk. "Is someone in there?" She glanced over her shoulder, distracted by paperwork. "They're early," she murmured. He frowned. "The cleaners?" She didn't answer right away. The housekeepers never came that late. Their rounds in the OR finished hours before. The hallway beyond the PACU should have been empty, completely still. She turned her chair toward the screens and maximized the feed from the OR camera. The hallway appeared lifeless. The sterile red line glowed faintly under the dim light. The door to PACU stood open, leading into the half-lit room beyond. "Hold on," she said, rising from her seat. "I'll check." He watched her disappear into the hallway, her figure briefly crossing one of the cameras before vanishing beyond the frame. The phone on the desk buzzed, and her voice came through, steady but quieter than usual. "You see me?" "Yeah," he said, his eyes never leaving the screen. "So you're clear." Then she was gone from the feed. For a few seconds, everything remained still. The monitors buzzed, a faint static line twitching at the bottom of one screen. Then, almost lazily, the light inside PACU flicked off again. A second later, yawned on, he sat perfectly still. The stool creaked beneath him. The air in the office felt suddenly colder. Her voice returned through the phone, half a whisper. "Nobody's in here." He stared at the monitor. "The lights are still going." A long pause. Then softly she laughed, but it didn't sound amused. "Guess our ghosts are bored tonight." He didn't answer, because even after she returned, the monitor didn't show her shadow moving in the doorway, only that pale, empty hallway, the red line shining like a wound across the floor, and a faint flicker of light that seemed to pulse in rhythm with a heartbeat. When she returned to the office, her fiancé was still staring at the screen. His face looked a little paler than usual, his hand resting on the mouse as if frozen mid-click. "Anything else?" she asked, setting her badge on the desk. Her voice tried for casual, but there was an edge beneath it. He blinked, finally looking away. It kept going. The lights, like someone was walking back and forth in there. She frowned, leaning over his shoulder. The feed now showed only stillness. The PACU light was steady again, the red line sharp under its glare. No movement, no shadow, no explanation. "Maybe a power fluctuation," she offered. He shook his head. If it was that, the other cameras would have blinked too. That was true. The rest of the feeds were fine. perfectly clear. She reached for her coffee, the cup now cold, and took a small sip anyway. "Hospitals are weird places," she said softly. "You get used to things that don't make sense." He didn't respond. He just kept watching the screen, his eyes scanning every small shift in the pixels, every flicker of light that might betray movement. After a while, he muttered, "What's that?" She followed his gaze. On the far edge of the hallway, just past where the red line crossed, a shape flickered. Not movement exactly, more like a distortion. The kind of blur you get when heat rises off metal. "Could just be the camera lag," she said quickly. "They're old." But as she said it, the blur sharpened, just enough to suggest a shoulder, maybe part of an arm. Then it was gone. Neither spoke for several seconds. The hum of the computer filled the silence, low and steady, like a mechanical heartbeat. "You see it too," he finally said. "Yeah," she whispered. "I see it." He leaned closer to the monitor, as though proximity could bring clarity. Could it have been a reflection? "There's nothing there to reflect," she murmured. She knew that hallway like the back of her hand. White walls, sterile tiles, and a single convex mirror at the far corner for safety. No windows, no glass, and yet something had flickered there. Something with the rough outline of a person. He sat back, rubbing his jaw. "You weren't kidding," he said almost to himself, "about the weird stuff that happens here." She smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. "You thought I was exaggerating." He looked at her, half amused, half unsettled. "I thought you were teasing me. You know, making the night shift sound spooky." Her eyes drifted back to the screens. Sometimes they do that on their own. For a while they both tried to ignore it. She returned to her paperwork, the rhythmic tapping of keys filling the quiet, while he scrolled through camera feeds just to keep his hands busy. But unease clung to the room like a low fog. Then around 23:15, something new happened. He'd switched to the split view, 8 larger camera feeds, and one of them caught his attention again, the OR hallway. Same red line, same open PACU door, only now there was her. He could see her, and standing halfway down the hallway facing the camera. She wasn't moving. The problem was, she was still sitting right beside him. He froze. His throat tightened. The air in the room seemed to go still. "Hey," he said quietly. "Don't freak out," but her head lifted. "What?" "Look." She followed his gaze to the screen. For a split second, she thought it was a reflection, maybe a glitch. But the figure on the camera wasn't copying her movements. It wasn't sitting. It wasn't even blinking. It was standing under the light, facing the camera straight on. And though the image was grainy, the shape was unmistakable. Same scrubs, same ponytail, same ID badge catching the light. Her, but not her. Then, before either could say a word, the screen flickered once and the figure was gone. The office lights buzzed louder for a moment, then steadied. The air felt colder again, just enough to make her shiver. She looked at him. He looked back at her. Neither wanted to speak the thought forming in both their minds. Whatever that was, it hadn't been a camera glitch, and whatever it was, and it knew exactly where to look. The minutes after the figure vanished felt unreal. Neither of them spoke. The only sound was the low mechanical hum of the servers. The office air had grown colder, not by much, but enough that the fiancé rubbed his arms, trying to chase away a sudden chill that seemed to come from nowhere. She glanced at the thermostat on the wall. The small digital screen still read 72 degrees. "Normal, too normal. You okay?" she asked finally. He nodded, though he didn't look convinced. "Yeah, just..." He paused. "That was your face on the screen." She didn't answer. There was nothing she could say that wouldn't sound insane. The hospital was old, parts of it built before half the staff were even born. Electrical glitches happened. Cameras lagged. Pixels could smear and create shapes. All of that made sense in daylight. But at midnight, in the silence of an empty surgical wing, reason felt paper thin. She tried to return to work. Reports, logs, shift notes. But her fingers wouldn't stay steady on the keyboard. Every so often, her eyes drifted to the screen, to the empty hallway where the figure had been. The fiancé leaned back on the stool, arms crossed. His reflection stared back faintly from the monitor's glass. "You said this kind of thing happens a lot?" "Little thing," he said softly. "Lights, doors, stuff moving when nobody's near it. You stop noticing after a while. Do you ever get used to it?" She looked at him then, really looked. He was trying to sound calm, but there was a stiffness in his posture, like he was bracing for something unseen. "No," she said. "You don't." He turned back to the screens. The hallway feed was still. The PACU door hung open, blackness beyond. Then, without warning, the camera shimmered. Just a single frame jump. Nothing dramatic, but it was enough for his pulse to spike. "Did you see that?" he asked. She nodded. "Just a glitch." But then came the sound. It was faint, and a metallic click echoing down the hall outside the office. Not loud, not sharp, but clear enough to make both of them freeze. She muted the camera feeds. The sound wasn't from the monitors. It was from the real hallway. "Could be a door settling," she whispered. "Could be," he agreed. But his voice was hollow. They listened. For several seconds, nothing. Then another sound, a long, low exhale, like a sigh. But it came from nowhere and everywhere at once. She stood up, automatically reaching for her badge as if it could protect her. "I'll check." He reached for her wrist. "Don't. It's probably a vent," she insisted, though her voice trembled slightly. "I just need to look." She opened the office door. The hallway outside stretched empty under dim lights, floor shining with that too-clean reflection, unique to hospitals after hours. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and something else, something metallic, almost sweet. Her fiancé stayed seated, watching her step into the corridor. From the monitor he could see her, the real her, moving past the doorway, disappearing into the camera's field of view. Then something odd happened. On the feed, her movement lagged for a fraction of a second, but instead of catching up, the image seemed to double. For one instant, two versions of her walked side by side down the corridor, their movements almost synchronized, until the second one turned its head toward the camera. He blinked, thinking it was an afterimage, but when he leaned closer, the second figure lingered just long enough to tilt its head. Not toward the lens exactly, but toward him. "Hey." His voice cracked. "Come back." From down the hall her voice came through faintly. "What?" "Come back now." She reappeared a few seconds later, expression puzzled. "Nothing out there," she said. "No one. Not even maintenance." He gestured at the screen. "There were two of you." "What?" He pointed at the feed. The hallway was empty again, clean, still. "Right there. On camera, two of you. One of them looked straight at me." She leaned in, scanning the footage as if hoping to find proof. But the system didn't record live feeds, not during their transition period. Whatever he'd seen was gone for good. He ran a hand over his face, trying to steady his breathing. I swear it was there. She didn't doubt him. Not anymore. But admitting that out loud meant acknowledging something she'd tried to ignore for years, that there were moments in this building when reality didn't quite line up with itself. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "Let's just finish the shift," she said quietly. Sunrise isn't far, but sunrise was 3 hours away. And as they turned their eyes back to the monitors, one of the smaller feeds, a hallway camera outside the OR, flickered. For just a moment, the lens caught what looked like a hand resting against the glass from the inside. Only, that camera was mounted 6 feet off the ground. The clock on the office wall ticked past midnight, but time had begun to lose its shape. The longer they stayed, the more the world outside those glowing monitors seemed to shrink, until the hum of the computers felt like the only thing keeping the dark at bay. Her fiancé sat forward, elbows on his knees, watching the feeds with the uneasy vigilance of someone who had seen too much but didn't know what he'd seen. Every few minutes his eyes flicked toward the windowless hallway beyond the office door, as if expecting someone, or something, to appear there. She tried to keep working, but concentration was impossible. Every shadow in the corners of the room looked too sharp. Every small sound seemed to stretch. When the air conditioner kicked on, they both jumped. "You're on edge," she murmured, forcing a faint smile. "Yeah," he admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. "Feels like the cameras are watching us, not the other way around." She wanted to laugh, but couldn't. The feed for the PACU hallway, the one with the red sterile line, glowed a little brighter than the others, like its exposure had shifted on its own. It drew the eye, commanding attention. Every time he tried to look away, his gaze was pulled back toward it. He finally sighed and said, "I think I need a break." "I'm going to stretch my legs and don't go far," she said. He nodded and stepped into the hallway, phone in hand. The linoleum squeaked faintly under his shoes. The air out there was cooler, almost damp as if the ventilation had stopped circulating properly. The fluorescent bulbs buzzed overhead, each one humming slightly out of sync, creating a soft, maddening vibration. He walked slowly past the nurse's station, empty and sterile, and glanced down toward the OR hallway. From this angle, the red line was just visible through the open doorway, slicing the floor like a wound. The light beyond was faint, flickering. He hesitated. Then the sound came, faint but unmistakable, from somewhere near the PACU. A breath. It wasn't the air vents. This was different, human, close. He froze, listening. The hospital was supposed to be empty. Housekeeping had finished hours ago, and all patient areas were closed off. He took one step forward, phone trembling slightly in his hand. Another breath. Then a shuffle, like bare feet against tile. He turned on his phone's flashlight and aimed it toward the sound. Nothing. The beam cut through the hallway and illuminated only the red line and the open PACU door, the edges of the frame glowing faintly white, empty. Still then, from the corner of his eye, he caught something, a reflection, faint but there, on the glass panel of a storage cabinet nearby. It wasn't his reflection, it was hers. He turned sharply. The hallway was empty. He looked back at the glass. The reflection was still there. Same face, same posture, but she wasn't standing behind him. The reflected figure's head tilted slowly to one side. He stumbled backward, the flashlight beam jerking across the walls. The reflection didn't move with him. It just stood there, head cocked, as if studying him through the surface of the glass. Then the office door opened and her voice broke the silence. "You okay?" He turned. She was standing there, real and confused, a stack of papers in her hand. When he looked back at the glass, the reflection was gone. He didn't say a word. He couldn't. She stared at him for a long moment before stepping closer. "You look like you saw something." He swallowed hard. "I did, as what was it?" He hesitated. "You," her brow furrowed. "Me?" He nodded. "Rousey in the reflection." "But you weren't there." She didn't laugh this time. She didn't say it was the lighting or fatigue or paranoia. She just said quietly, "That's how it starts." He frowned. "What starts?" But she didn't answer. Instead, she looked toward the monitors again, her face tightening. The PACU feed, the one that had flickered before, now showed a darkened hallway. The lights were off again. Only this time, the camera's infrared sensor had kicked in, washing the image in cold, sterile gray, and there, standing just past the red line, was a shape. Still, human-shaped but blurred at the edges. As if the camera couldn't quite focus, the figure didn't move, didn't breathe, it just stood there, watching. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The monitors glowed in the darkened office, their pale light spilling across the desks like ghostly water. The air felt thick, charged, as though the building itself had drawn a deep breath and was waiting for something to happen. The figure on the PACU feed didn't move. It stood at the far end of the hallway, half shrouded by the sterile gray of the night vision mode. It was shaped like a person, but wrong in ways the brain struggled to define. Proportions that didn't quite match, shadows that didn't follow logic. Her fiancé leaned forward, the stool creaking beneath him. "Can it be someone from night staff?" She shook her head. "All doors past or are locked. You'd need a key card, be mine or my boss's, and the motion sensors would have gone off." He swallowed. "So then what is it?" She didn't answer. Instead, she reached for the keyboard and toggled through the other feeds, her fingers moving fast and steady, almost too steady. One after another, the cameras blinked to life. Empty corridors, supply rooms, waiting areas, all perfectly still. Then, as she cycled back to the PACU view, the figure was gone. Her fiancé exhaled sharply. "See, glitch?" Probably a glitch. She wanted to believe that. She really did. But the moment she switched to another feed, one from the East Surgical Wing, her heart dropped. The same shape stood there. Different hallway. Different camera. Same figure. He noticed it too. That's the other side of the building," he said, voice cracking. "How did—" The figure stood motionless again, the same way it had before, head slightly tilted, body faintly blurred at the edges. Its face was a pale void, washed out by the lens. She tapped the keyboard again. The next feed loaded. The figure moved. It was instant. One frame empty, the next with the shape closer to the camera. The change was subtle but unmistakable. It wasn't walking. It was just there. Her fiancé pushed his stool back, the legs scraping across the tile. "Okay," he said, voice low. "That's not possible." She toggled another feed, the maternity. Wing empty. Another, the staff corridor by the stairwell empty. Another. The main ore hall, the figure closer facing. The camera directly now, the outline faintly rippling as though seen through heat. For a moment, they both forgot to breathe. Then the feed flickered, and for just 1 second, the entire grid of cameras, all 26 small boxes, went black. When the image returned, the figure was gone from the OR hall, gone from all the feeds. The fiancé stood slowly. "I think we should go," he whispered. Now. She wanted to agree, but something kept her frozen. If it's really someone, I have to report it. I can't just leave the floor unsecured." He looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "You think this is someone?" Her eyes drifted to the upper shelf monitor, the one angled slightly higher than the others. Its feed came from the office doorway, a small safety measure. The screen showed both of them, just as it should. Her at the desk, him standing behind her. But in the far corner of the frame and the space behind the filing cabinet, there was a third shape. Neither of them moved for a full 5 seconds. Then the shape shifted, only slightly, enough that they saw it was leaning. "Watching," he whispered. "That's inside this room." She turned, heart hammering so loud it drowned out everything else. The corner was empty, just the cabinet. When she looked back at the monitor, the shape was gone. She felt something cold brush the back of her neck, faint as a sigh. Her fiancé grabbed her hand. "We're leaving," she didn't argue. They left the office lights on, monitors still humming, screens still cycling through their endless, empty halls. But as they passed through the double doors toward the elevators, one of the cameras, the one above the office, caught their retreating figures, and just before the feed faded to static, the shadow behind the filing cabinet turned its head, following them out. By morning, the hospital seemed almost kind again. Sunlight filtered weakly through the narrow glass blocks along the outer hallways, turning everything pale and harmless. The corridors buzzed with routine, nurses changing shifts, voices echoing faintly, the smell of coffee mingling with disinfectant. Her fiancé had left just before dawn, silent during the drive. Neither of them had spoken about what they'd seen. They didn't need to. The silence between them said enough. She stayed until her shift ended at 7, trying to keep busy. But the office felt different now, emptier, yet heavier somehow, as though the air itself remembered. The monitors hummed as usual, all showing nothing out of the ordinary. No shapes, no flickers, no shadows that shouldn't exist. Still, every so often, when she wasn't looking directly at them, she could have sworn she saw one feed brighten, just slightly, as if something had moved she didn't check. She didn't want to. When she finally clocked out, she told herself it was over. Just another strange night, fatigue, too much caffeine, a trick of the mind. But the feeling followed her home. Their apartment always felt safe, warm, cluttered, alive. Plants by the kitchen window, a cat that slept on the couch, the faint hum of the fridge filling the background. But that morning, when she walked through the door, the air felt different, not cold, not heavy, just off. She dropped her bag and sat on the edge of the bed, phone buzzing softly with a message. It was him. "Did you sleep?" She typed back, "Not yet. You?" Tried. Kept thinking about the camera. "Don't," she wrote. "It's done, yeah, but my phone turned on by itself, twice." She frowned, rereading that last message. Before she could respond, another arrived. "And I heard something in the hallway. Thought it was the cat." Then, after a pause, "The cat was with me," she didn't reply. A soft hum came from her nightstand. The phone screen brightened, though she hadn't touched it. And for a split second, the wallpaper glitched. The screen turned grey, fuzzy, the pixels vibrating in a way she recognized instantly. Static. The same kind the monitors had shown when the figure moved between feeds. She turned the phone face down. Later that evening, he came over. He looked exhausted, eyes bloodshot, movement slow. She made coffee, and they tried to pretend everything was fine. But the silence between them felt like a weight pressing on their chests. He finally said, "Do you remember how it looked on the monitor? The hallway?" She nodded. He rubbed his temple. Last night when I got home, the light in the hall outside my apartment, it was flickering. Same rhythm, on-off. On-off? Could have been coincidence, she said automatically. Yeah, he said softly. Could have. Then he added, almost whispering, but it stopped when I looked at it. She froze. Stopped? Yeah, like it knew I was watching. Neither said anything for a long time after that. The only sound was the faint buzz of the refrigerator and the occasional hum from her phone charging on the counter. Then, as if in perfect timing, every light in the apartment dimmed for exactly 2 seconds. Not flickered, dimmed. And when they came back to full brightness, her phone screen lit up without any notification, without any reason, and showed the camera app open. The live feed was facing them, and for a moment they could see themselves sitting there at the table. Then, in the reflection of the kitchen window behind them, another figure stood closer this time. By the next evening, the two of them had agreed, without saying it out loud, not to talk about the reflection in the window. They acted as though life had returned to normal. She brewed tea. He scrolled through his phone. The cat prowled lazily across the kitchen counter. But the apartment carried a new stillness, a sort of held breath that didn't belong to either of them. When she walked past the hallway mirror, she caught her own reflection half a second out of step. Not much, just a blink's delay, but enough to make her stop. She leaned closer. The reflection matched her now perfectly. Maybe she had imagined it, maybe. Her fiancé noticed her lingering. Are you okay? She forced a smile. Fine, just tired. He nodded, but his eyes flicked toward the mirror as he passed. He looked just for an instant too long. That night they watched a movie, trying to fill the silence with ordinary noise. The TV light washed the room in cold blue. Everything felt almost safe until the credits rolled. The television froze for a fraction of a second. Then the screen went black. A faint reflection remained, both of them sitting on the couch, except the image showed them still watching, mouths slightly open, while in reality they were staring at a dark screen. She reached for the remote, her hand shaking slightly. The image on the blank TV caught the motion an instant late, repeating it like a delayed echo. Then both reflections turned their heads toward the viewer, toward them. The remote slipped from her fingers and hit the carpet. The sound broke the spell. The screen flickered back to its ordinary dark shine. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. They knew they had seen it. The next day at the hospital, she tried to drown herself in routine. Charts, schedules, medication logs. Everything mechanical, normal, measurable. Yet every surface that held a reflection, computer screens, glass panels, polished floors, felt alive with faint waiting light. In the security office, the monitors hummed steadily. No distortions, no shadows. But when she leaned back in the chair, the glass of the nearest screen caught her face just barely. Her reflection blinked. She hadn't. She looked away immediately, heart racing. When she turned back, the reflection was perfectly still. Exactly as it should be, she whispered, "Stop it." The hum deepened, like the machines were listening. That night, she and her fiancé met for dinner, trying again for normalcy. They sat by the window of a small diner, the glass reflecting the dim interior lights and the empty street outside. Rain tapped gently against the glass. At one point, he lifted his coffee cup, pausing mid-gesture. "Do you see that?" he asked quietly. She followed his gaze. In the reflection of the window, two figures sat exactly where they were, but the duplicates weren't holding cups. Their hands were resting on the table, perfectly still, eyes fixed forward. Then, so slowly she almost doubted it, the reflected version of her fiancé smiled. Not the real one. Only the one in the glass. He exhaled shakily and set his cup down. The reflection didn't move for another heartbeat, then mirrored the action a beat too late. She whispered, "It's copying us." He shook his head. "No, it's learning us." Outside, a car passed, headlights sweeping through the window. For the brief moment the light flooded the glass, the reflections vanished. When the light faded, the reflections were gone. They sat there for a long time after that, not touching their food, listening to the hum of rain against the glass. When they returned home, the apartment lights flickered once, just once, as though something had followed them back again. The cat hissed, low and soft, staring at the blank television screen, and in the reflection of the dark glass, Two faint silhouettes stood behind them, motionless, patient, almost indistinguishable from their own. The following night, the apartment felt heavier than before. The air seemed to hang in layers, each one pressing down softly but insistently. Shadows pooled in corners that had never seemed dark. And every reflective surface, mirrors, glass doors, even the shiny edge of the refrigerator, seemed to hold a faint shimmer that wasn't quite their own. She sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee. Her fiancé leaned back on the couch, phone in hand, trying to read, but his eyes kept darting toward her. Then it happened. She raised her hand to brush a strand of hair behind her ear. In the reflection of the window behind her, the hand moved first. Her real hand lagged behind, almost like the reflection was rehearsing the motion. Her heart stopped. She froze, eyes locked on the glass. Her fiancé whispered, "Did you see that?" She nodded, voice tight. It's ahead of me." The reflection blinked, perfectly synchronized with the motion she would make a moment later. Then it paused, tilted its head slightly, almost mockingly. He stood and walked toward her slowly. His reflection began moving before he did, taking steps that he hadn't yet taken, bending slightly as if to anticipate his posture. He gasped and froze. The reflection stopped in mid-motion. He raised a hand to his chest, trembling. The reflection mimicked the movement a second before he could, tilting its head to watch him. She pushed back her chair and whispered, "It's learning us, watching us, planning its next move." He turned, searching the apartment for a logical explanation. The cat hissed again from the couch, ears flat, fur bristling. Even it seemed to sense the wrongness in the air. For several minutes neither spoke. They moved slowly, deliberately, testing the reflections. Every step, every hand gesture, every blink was anticipated by the figures in the glass. Then came the most disturbing part. When they sat back down, facing each other, the reflection of her fiancé smiled again. But this time the smile was broader than his own. Almost aware, she noticed it first. Her breath caught. "It knows what we're thinking," she whispered. He swallowed, staring. "It doesn't just mimic. It understands us." The coffee cup she held in her hands trembled slightly. When she placed it back on the table, the reflection set its cup down a heartbeat before she did. They both realized the truth at the same moment. Whatever it wasn't just a copy. It was practicing, anticipating, learning every micro-movement, every gesture, every pause. The lights flickered once. Then, for a brief instant, all reflective surfaces simultaneously caught the image of the apartment. Empty, silent, and yet crowded. A dozen faint silhouettes lingered in the glass, behind the refrigerator, the bedroom mirror, the living room window. All motionless, all waiting. Neither of them moved, because even the act of moving was no longer entirely their own. By now, the apartment no longer felt like their own. Every reflective surface had become a window into something else, a parallel version of the room that obeyed different rules. The air was thick, almost tactile, pressing lightly against their skin with an invisible weight. She moved toward the kitchen counter, reaching for a mug. The reflection moved first, turning in advance, its hand lingering in the air a heartbeat before hers. Then it did something new. The coffee mug she had intended to grab lifted slightly in the reflection before her own hand made contact. A subtle levitation, just enough to unsettle her. She froze. The mug in reality didn't move, yet the shadow of the action on the glass was precise, almost deliberate. He noticed too. His phone, resting on the couch arm, slid an inch closer to the edge as if nudged by some invisible hand. He grabbed it quickly. The cat hissed again, low and guttural, staring at the mirrored world as if it could see the intruder. Its fur bristled, tail whipping nervously. "They're doing more than watching now," he said. His voice was low, barely a whisper. "They're interacting." She nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the refrigerator's mirrored door. There the silhouettes began moving independently, shifting subtly. One leaned closer, peering from the corner of the reflection. Another pressed a hand against the glass, though the real surface was untouched. She swallowed hard, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. "They're testing the boundaries," she said, "seeing what they can do." The lights flickered again, this time more insistently. Shadows twisted across the walls that didn't match the furniture, the layout of the room. The apartment seemed to bend in impossible angles. corners stretching or compressing in peripheral vision. Her fiancé moved toward the bedroom, hoping for some distance. The reflection anticipated him, stepping ahead slightly, pausing at the doorway, mirroring him before he moved. He stopped, frozen, realizing even an empty hallway was no longer empty. Then, in the living room mirror, they saw it, a version of themselves seated on the couch. They hadn't sat yet. The reflection smiled. Slowly, wider than possible. She whispered, "It's learning how to exist without us." He nodded grimly, backing into the hallway. Every step they took, every small movement was mirrored a second ahead, leaving them unsure which was reality and which was projection. A sound joined the visual distortion, a faint whisper, almost inaudible, as if the reflections were speaking in a language just beyond hearing. The room felt alive now. Each flicker of light, each shadow, each glass surface held the presence of something patient, deliberate, intelligent, and it wasn't content to remain passive. As they stared, the coffee table lamp flickered violently, casting long, jittering shadows that moved against the natural flow of light. A book slid slightly, a subtle, deliberate motion. They froze. It wasn't a hallucination. Not entirely. The apartment was quietly confirming their worst fear. The reflections were no longer just images. They were intruders. The apartment felt suffocating. Every reflective surface seemed to pulse with silent awareness. Even the faint hum of electricity now carried a sense of intent, a rhythmic vibration that synced with their racing hearts. She held her mug tightly, knuckles white, staring at the living room mirror. The reflection inside no longer just mirrored her movements. It acted independently. It leaned forward before she did, blinked slowly when she hadn't, and its eyes seemed to search her for something she couldn't name. Her fiancé stood behind her, breathing shallowly, eyes flicking from the window glass to the refrigerator door to the small bathroom mirror. Every surface held a faint outline of them, yet subtly wrong. A tilt of the head a fraction too early. A hand raised before it should have been. Movements that preempted reality. "They know us," he whispered, voice tight. "They're inside us. Our patterns, our instincts." She didn't respond. She could only watch. The lamp on the table flickered violently, and for an instant the reflections expanded. Their mirrored selves grew slightly taller, broader, sharper. Shadows deepened unnaturally, bending the angles of the room. Then came the sound. A faint, low echo, like a dozen breaths layered together, seeping from the mirrored surfaces. The whispering wasn't words, but tones that somehow felt like communication, precise and deliberate, reverberating directly in their minds. She stumbled back, colliding lightly with the wall. The reflection didn't stumble. It smiled. He reached for her hand. "We need to leave," he said, though even as the words left him, the reflection of him was already ahead, stepping past his real self, guiding, or mocking. They backed toward the front door. Each step was mirrored a fraction before it happened, making the hallways feel like they were following a rhythm not entirely their own. The cat hissed and darted behind the couch, tail puffed, fixated on the far side of the kitchen window. There in the darkened glass, a dozen faint silhouettes moved independently, not mirroring but existing, each one poised, patient, watching. The door handle rattled. She yanked it open. Outside, the hallway was normal, empty, safe at least for the moment. But when she glanced back at the apartment, the reflections didn't vanish. In every glass, every pane, every glossy surface, the silhouettes lingered. They no longer needed to mirror. They were learning, waiting, watching. She and her fiancé stepped into the hallway, breathing fast, hearts pounding. Every instinct screamed to leave, yet something tugged at the edges of perception. A whispering insistence in the back of the mind. They're not done. When they finally reached the elevator, she dared one glance back through the apartment window. The reflections stared. Not copies, not mirrors, not fully present, but patient, deliberate, and unbroken. The doors closed. The hum of the elevator was louder than the city outside, vibrating with something unseen. And in the faint reflection on the elevator's polished steel doors, she saw it. Herself and him standing in the apartment behind them. Their faces calm, watching, smiling. Only they weren't. The doors slid shut completely, leaving only silence, shadows, and the unmistakable certainty, whatever it was. It was learning, and it wasn't finished, the end and for now. The road with a vibe. I was about 13 when it started. Back when life in our small village mostly revolved around boredom, adventure, and dares. The village itself was quiet, surrounded by farmland, old fences, and the occasional sheep that would stubbornly block the roads. There was this one road that, for whatever reason, always gave us a weird vibe. It wasn't a long road, maybe a few hundred meters, but it had this tunnel-like quality. The trees on either side arched overhead, their branches twisting together so densely that even on sunny days the middle of the road was cloaked in shadow. And in winter, when the afternoons were short and the sun dipped early, that road became almost pitch black and eerie. Narrow tunnels slicing through the farmland. We didn't know why, exactly, but whenever one of us walked past it, we'd feel a strange tension. It wasn't just creepy, it felt alive in a way that made your skin prickle. Yet being 13, that tension didn't scare us as much as it intrigued us. It was perfect for dares, especially when we wanted to prove who was braver than the rest. At first it was just little games. Dare each other to walk a few steps into the shadow, then run back. Eventually the dares escalated, and we started challenging each other to go all the way down the road. That's when we started really noticing the details, the way the light disappeared beneath the tree arch, the distant sound of the wind through the branches that sounded almost like whispers, and the strange, almost mechanical creak of branches swaying together in the winter wind. We got familiar with it over time. We knew the halfway point, the bend where the trees leaned a little more to the left, and the broken fence post near the old hedgerow. It became our secret spot, a place we returned to day after day, even as the days grew shorter and the shadows longer. And then, one day, we noticed something that changed everything. A few days into our explorations, we started noticing something odd halfway down the road. Hidden almost completely by brambles and thick undergrowth was a gate. Not just any gate, it was old, rusty, and clearly hadn't been touched in decades. You could barely see the metal under the overgrowth, and its hinges were probably long gone from disuse. The weird thing was, it didn't feel like it belonged there. The road was public, but this gate, entangled by nature, looked like it was trying to keep something in or out. We couldn't explain why, but it gave off a vibe that immediately made us tense. Being 13 and foolishly brave, we tried to move it. We tugged, pushed, kicked, even tried to climb it. Nothing. It was stuck, swallowed by the overgrowth so completely that it seemed part of the landscape itself. Moss covered the rusted bars, and a few stubborn weeds grew straight through the hinges. After a few minutes of struggling, we gave up. But then came the part that got under our skin. As we stepped back just to catch our breath, we all felt it. The gate had a presence. Not alive exactly, but like it was aware we were touching it. Every one of us got goosebumps, but none of us said it out loud. The next day, we went back. Our group was smaller. One friend hadn't joined us that day. And that's when it happened. The gate was different. The overgrowth was gone, completely. Every vine, every bush that had choked it was gone, leaving the metal of the gate exposed. And not just that, it was no longer rusty. The gate looked as if it had just been installed yesterday. Clean, functional, the hinges moving smoothly when we tried to open it. We froze. None of us spoke for a moment. The air felt heavier, like the shadows themselves had deepened. The sound of the wind through the trees seemed sharper, almost like it carried whispers we couldn't understand. It didn't make sense. We knew what we had seen yesterday. The gate had been impossible to move. Now here it was, pristine and fully functional. One of my friends reached out and slowly pushed it open. It swung easily. Closed just as smoothly, we didn't linger. Something about it, something about how different it looked, made our stomachs turn cold. We left quickly, trying to convince ourselves it was just a trick of the light, that maybe our eyes were playing up. But we couldn't shake the feeling that the road itself had changed, that something was watching us, waiting. The next day, we told the friend who had missed it all. Of course, they didn't believe us, so we promised to go back with them, to show them exactly what we'd seen. But that's when things got worse. The next day, we returned to the road, this time with our skeptical friend. Their disbelief hung in the air like a challenge, and to be honest, we were hoping that seeing it themselves would make everything seem normal. But nothing about this road had ever been normal. As we approached the halfway point, the trees casting long, twisting shadows across the path, We froze. The gate was back. Not just back, it was exactly how we'd first discovered it. Rusted, immovable, overgrown with thick weeds and thorny vines. Every branch we'd seen cleared the day before was now tangled across the metal. The hinges were stuck. The paint was chipped, the rust glaring in the pale winter sunlight. We stared. My stomach knotted. One by one, we all reached out to touch it, half expecting our hands to pass through empty air, half expecting it to vanish again. But it was solid, real, immovable. No way, one of my friends whispered. Their voice shook. We all felt it, the same disbelief, the same creeping dread. None of us said anything for what felt like an eternity. The gate had simply returned to its previous state, as if the day before had been some hallucination, or a dream none of us could explain. I remember looking at my friend who had come yesterday. They were pale, eyes wide, fumbling for words. I don't get it, they stammered. It was clean yesterday. I saw it. Exactly. And now it wasn't. We tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone had cleared it and replaced the overgrowth? But that didn't make sense. It was winter. The ground was frozen and the dense undergrowth hadn't been touched by anyone. We knew that. None of it added up. A cold wind passed through the trees, and for the first time the shadows felt alive. The road that had always seemed slightly eerie now felt hostile. It was almost as if it had remembered us from yesterday and disapproved of our curiosity. We didn't linger. Something inside each of us told us to leave. We left quickly, without even a proper goodbye, and none of us spoke of it on the way back. The silence was heavy, broken only by the crunch of frozen leaves underfoot. From that day on, we didn't go back, not immediately. Not until curiosity and youthful recklessness got the better of us. After that day, the road haunted us. Even when we weren't there, it lingered in our thoughts. The way the trees arched, the strange shadows, and most of all, the gate. It wasn't just that it had changed. It was the sheer impossibility of it. Something about the way it had appeared clean and functional, and then reverted, made our skin crawl. We started noticing small things elsewhere, little oddities that didn't make sense at the time. Our gate latch swinging open on its own at my house. For it became a wordless understanding. We had crossed a boundary, seen something we weren't meant to see, and survived by ignoring it. But the strange things kept happening. Small at first, a gate creaking in the distance, a door opening on its own, a shadow where no one stood. Then bigger. A sensation of being watched, footsteps echoing when the house was empty. Every one of us could feel it in our own lives. We shared the same memories, yet the events outside the road started overlapping into reality. One night I had a dream. I was standing in that tunnel of trees. The gate stood ahead, swinging open by itself. Behind it I could see nothing but blackness. I reached out, my hand trembling, and felt the cold metal. But it wasn't metal. It felt like liquid, like the gate was alive and breathing under my fingers. I woke up drenched in sweat, and I could still feel that weight in my chest for hours. We were 13, but we all knew, without saying it, that we had stumbled onto something beyond our understanding. Something that didn't obey rules, and every time we tried to act normal, it reminded us that it was still there, waiting, watching. Weeks passed, and we tried to return to normal life, but the memory of that road wouldn't let us. Every time we walked near the farmland, or even just thought about that dark tunnel of trees, it felt as though the shadows were stretching toward us. That gate had been a focal point, but slowly I started noticing that it wasn't the only part of the road that seemed wrong. The bend in the road where the trees leaned a little more to the left began to feel alive in my memory. I could hear faint whispers in the wind, almost like voices just beyond comprehension. They weren't words, not really, but they were deliberate, trying to pull me in. The shadows themselves seemed heavier there, as if the road was breathing beneath the arch of trees. One day, one of my friends, Tom, claimed he saw something moving in the undergrowth, something blacker than shadow. When we asked him to explain, he shook his head, pale, and said only, "It looked wrong. Not animal, not human, wrong." I realized then that the road wasn't just a location. It was a presence, and we had disturbed it. That gate, moving from overgrown and stuck to pristine and functional, wasn't a one-time trick of the eyes. It was a signal, a warning, or maybe a test. We started meeting less, avoiding the road entirely. But sometimes, when a winter afternoon grew dark, and the wind carried the smell of frost and damp earth, I could swear I saw the arch of trees from my bedroom window. That same tunnel leading somewhere I didn't want to go but couldn't stop my mind from imagining. And it wasn't just me. I knew from subtle signs. The way friends flinched at empty corridors. The way their voices dropped when talking about nothing. But they felt it too. The road had left a mark on us, like a scar we couldn't see but could feel every time we were quiet, every time the air shifted. Then, one evening, something truly impossible happened. I was walking home alone, and as I passed a quiet side road near the village, I saw it, an outline arching overhead like the trees from the road. I froze, my heart stopped. The gate, faint but visible, stood at the end, swinging slowly. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. When I looked again, nothing was there. I didn't sleep that night, and I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. It was a few weeks later, winter pressing its darkest afternoons upon us, when I ended up near the road again, by accident, or maybe by some unexplainable pull. The village was quiet, frost cracking underfoot, and the sky was already bruised purple with the dying light. I don't know what made me turn down that path. Curiosity? Recklessness? Something darker. A tug in my chest that I couldn't resist. The trees loomed overhead as usual, their branches intertwining like skeletal fingers. Shadows pooled in impossible shapes along the road. The air felt heavier, as though it were pressing against my skin. I saw it then, the gate. Not the rusty, overgrown one, nor the pristine one, but something in between. Shadows clung to it like a living thing, moving in ways that defied the wind. It swung slowly, silently, and I swear the air itself seemed to hum. I wanted to turn back, but my feet didn't obey. It was like the road had claimed me in some subtle way, an invisible tether drawing me forward. The gate opened as I approached, and the space beyond it, it wasn't the farmland. It was darker, deeper, stretching into nothing. My chest tightened. My mind screamed to run, but I couldn't move. Then I heard it, a faint whisper almost carried on the cold wind. Not words, but syllables I couldn't recognize, and yet somehow they felt important, like a warning or a command. I staggered back, heart hammering, and the gate swung closed on its own. The sound reverberated through the trees, louder than it should have been, like a clap inside my skull. When I blinked, everything was normal. The overgrown gate stood there, rusty and unmoving. The shadows lay flat and still. My hands were shaking, my breath ragged. I ran home without looking back, not even once. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house, every flicker of shadow on the walls reminded me of that gate. And I realized with a sinking feeling that that road wasn't finished with me. The others noticed too. We would meet sometimes, and even in daylight our conversations would drop when someone mentioned the road. We didn't need to explain it. We all knew. That place had changed us. But I was about to learn that the road wasn't just an eerie place in the village. It was something else entirely. Something patient, something that waited. It started subtly at first. One by one, my friends began reporting odd experiences, not just on the road, but elsewhere. Tom swore he saw the gate reflected in a puddle along the main street, though when he looked directly, there was nothing there. I caught a glimpse of it in the corner of my eye while walking past a back alley near the village. We began to piece it together in whispered conversations. It wasn't the road itself that was strange. It was the gate, and somehow it followed us. One evening we decided to meet secretly, determined to talk openly about it. It was dark, the village streets deserted, and even the winter moon hid behind thick clouds. Each of us arrived trembling, glancing over our shoulders as if the road, or something tied to it, might materialize out of the darkness. "I saw it last night," Tom whispered. "At my house, just in my backyard. The gate, it was open, and the shadows, they were moving. Not like normal shadows, like they were alive." We exchanged uneasy glances. None of us spoke, but we all knew it wasn't a joke. Then, as if on cue, a sound echoed faintly through the streets. A low metallic swing, soft but distinct. We froze. The sound didn't come from anywhere near us, or from anywhere logical. It was coming from everywhere. We didn't run that time. We couldn't. It was like the air itself held us in place, pressing in, warm and heavy despite the winter chill. The sensation wasn't fear exactly. It was something more primal. The gate, it was aware. For the first time we realized the truth. This wasn't just a place you could avoid. It didn't stay put. It could appear anywhere. And we, just by seeing it, touching it, acknowledging it, had invited it into our lives. We broke the meeting quickly after that. Not a word was spoken for days. Even in sunlight, the paranoia lingered. A corner of my eye caught shapes moving where nothing should have been. A gate-like shadow appeared across my bedroom wall in the morning light. We were trapped in its presence without knowing why. The road had claimed a part of us, and the gate had followed, patient, waiting for the next moment to make itself fully known. It was months later, and none of us could take it anymore. The gate wasn't just a memory anymore. It was in every corner of our minds, in every shadow that seemed too dark, every whisper of wind that carried a chill down our spines. We decided, recklessly, to go back, together. The same group, older but still foolish, convinced that maybe confronting it directly could somehow make it stop. Maybe facing it would break the spell. We approached the road at dusk, winter shadows stretching long and crooked. The trees arched overhead as they always did, but now the darkness felt different, thicker. The air was heavier. We moved slowly, every footstep sounding like a drumbeat in a cathedral of shadows. Then we saw it, the gate, standing at the halfway point, exactly where we had first seen it, rusted and overgrown. No clean and functional. No, it was something else. The metal glimmered strangely, reflecting light that wasn't there. The bars seemed to bend subtly as if the gate were breathing, expanding and contracting almost imperceptibly. "Do we touch it?" whispered one friend. We didn't answer. No one wanted to move, to speak, to acknowledge it. But the gate swung open slowly, without a sound, as if it had been waiting for us. A cold wind rushed past us from the opening, carrying a faint metallic tang that burned our noses. I stepped forward. My hand trembled as I reached for it. The moment I touched the cold metal, the shadows along the road seemed to shift. Shapes moved in ways that were impossible, elongated, twisting, forming figures that weren't human, weren't animal, yet seemed to stare directly at us. One of my friends screamed, breaking the silence, and the gate slammed shut violently. The impact sent a shockwave of cold through the air, and we stumbled back, hearts hammering, lungs burning. We didn't speak as we ran, didn't look back. Even as we left the village behind, the sensation of being watched followed, lingered. The gate hadn't just returned to normal, it had reacted. And somewhere deep in our bones, we knew it hadn't finished with us. From that night on, none of us spoke of returning. The road, the gate, the shadows, they weren't just memories anymore. They were a presence, living quietly in the edges of our perception, waiting for the next moment we might slip, the next time we might see. After that night, life tried to resume, but nothing was the same. The road, the gate, the shadows, they had left a mark on us that couldn't be erased. We never spoke of it in detail. Not to parents, not to anyone outside the group. Even among ourselves, conversations stopped short, words faltering in the silence. It was like admitting it aloud might summon it back, and none of us were willing to risk that. But the effects were subtle, persistent. One friend started waking in the middle of the night, convinced he heard the creak of a gate or the swish of branches overhead, even in his bedroom. Another would catch a shadow at the edge of his vision, stretching impossibly across walls and hallways, vanishing when he tried to focus. For me, it was the memory that never faded. I could still see the tunnel of trees, the way the gate had seemed alive, the way it had opened for us, silently daring us to enter. And I could still feel it, faint but undeniable, at the edge of perception, as if the road and the gate were just waiting. Waiting for the day we let our guard down, the day we crossed that line again. We grew older, moved on to different towns, different lives. Yet every time winter fell, and the afternoons grew short and dark, I felt it again. Goosebumps, a shiver down the spine, a shadow in the corner of the eye that moved just a little too fast. The truth is, we never understood what we saw. Was it supernatural? A trick of the mind? A memory overlapping reality? Maybe. But some part of me knows the simple, terrifying truth. The road, the gate, the shadows, they exist outside explanation. And we were only fortunate enough to witness it. Partially. Sometimes I wonder, when I see a twisted arch of trees or a shadow lingering too long, if the gate is out there somewhere waiting for someone else to notice it, waiting for the moment it can appear clean, functional, perfect, before it disappears again. And I know without a doubt, that if you ever stumble across a place like that, you will feel it too. The silent, watching presence that doesn't belong anywhere, yet somehow touches everything, because some things once seen never let you go.